This story begins in the small town of Eddington, New Mexico, right in the middle of the pandemic. Sheriff Joe patrols the empty streets while watching a video in his car about how to convince your partner to start a family. Everything seems quiet until two tribal police officers approach his vehicle. They ask him to wear a mask, reminding him that he's outside his jurisdiction. Joe refuses, claiming the pandemic isn't real, but eventually puts it on to avoid trouble. Soon after, his deputy Michael calls over the radio to report a disturbance at Mayor Ted's bar. Joe heads there and finds the mayor meeting with some business partners, discussing plans for a new data center in town. A homeless man named Lodge tries to enter, and the mayor orders Joe to remove him. The man resists, a scuffle breaks out, and he manages to escape, while several young people record the incident on their phones. From that moment, the tension between Joe and Ted becomes clear. Two men with very different visions for their town. That night, Joe returns home. In the living room, his mother-in-law Dawn is asleep watching conspiracy videos. He shuts the laptop and joins his wife Louise, who notices he's limping, though Joe brushes it off. They barely talk and try to sleep, but the emotional distance between them is obvious. The next morning at breakfast, Dawn starts sharing theories that the virus was created by the government. Joe tries to ignore her, though it's clear her comments make him uncomfortable. On his way to work, Joe witnesses an argument outside a convenience store. An elderly man without a mask is trying to go inside, but the owner refuses to let him. Joe steps in, saying the man has asthma and can't be forced to wear one. When the owner refuses, Joe removes his own mask and buys the man's groceries himself. At that moment, Mayor Ted walks in and reminds him to follow the rules. Joe stands his ground, saying those rules aren't mandatory. As they leave, the old man thanks Joe and takes a photo with him. The photo quickly goes viral, earning Joe a wave of online support. Motivated by the response, he records a video claiming there's no COVID in Eddington and accusing the authorities of abusing their power. He speaks about freedom, family, and faith. He ends by announcing that he's running for mayor to give the town its independence back. Later that day, when he returns to the station, his deputies Guy and Michael are shocked. Joe asks for their help designing campaign posters. Michael gets excited and shows off his shooting skills at the practice range. Laughing, Joe tells them to buy handmade dolls from Louise to support her small business. A bit later, Joe receives an unexpected call from Mayor Ted, who's waiting for him outside. Ted tries to apologize, but Joe records the conversation on his phone and makes it clear he's moving forward with his campaign. Ted mocks him, saying he can't even run his own police department. Joe replies that the people will decide who deserves to be mayor. Meanwhile, Ted attends a city council meeting. A councilwoman questions him about the water and power use involved in the data center project. Ted gets irritated, but his advisor Warren steps in to calm him down. Warren reminds him they could use Louise's mental health history to discredit Joe, but Ted refuses. He explains that he only went out with her a couple of times years ago, and that her mother made up a story to accuse him. That night, Ted's son Eric sneaks out to hang with friends, and Ted tells him to be careful. Across town, Joe and his deputies watch one of Ted's campaign ads, mocking him for trying to look like a hero. They decide to improve their own messaging. Then they visit Paula, one of Ted's political opponents, who reveals that the data center is being built on land shared with the Pueblo community, and that the project is tied to a major tech company. Joe starts suspecting corruption behind it all. That night, several young people, including Eric, Sarah, and Brian, gather around a bonfire. Sarah is Michael's ex-girlfriend, and Brian has feelings for her. Trying to impress her, Brian acts smart, but when he steps away to grab some beers, he sees Sarah and Eric flirting. Later, he finds a photo of them together on social media. Jealousy hits him hard, but he keeps it to himself. Back at the station, Joe tells Michael he's thinking of promoting him to sergeant, and the young man lights up with excitement. That night, Joe gets home and realizes his wife isn't there. He finds her laptop open, their campaign video playing on loop, and another tab open on the website of a man named Vernon Jefferson Peake, who talks about government conspiracies. The next morning, Louise and Dawn return home. Louise won't talk to Joe and locks herself in her room. He tries to apologize, promising everything he's doing is for their family, but she reminds him that stress could trigger another breakdown. Still, she agrees to have dinner with him that evening. Later, Joe keeps pushing his campaign forward. In his speeches, he criticizes Mayor Ted, accuses the governor of trying to control the town through pointless mandates, and warns people about the new data center project. During a parade, Eric crosses paths with Joe and taunts him, bringing up Louise's past. Joe holds back his anger and walks away. Soon after, a group of young people organizes a protest against police brutality. Among them are Sarah and Eric. Joe shows up trying to calm things down, but they insist they're fighting for racial justice. Sarah confronts Michael, telling him that, as a black man, he should be standing with them. Michael stays silent. That night, Joe sets the table, hoping to make peace with his wife. But when she arrives, she's not alone. She's accompanied by Dawn, Vernon, and a couple named Nicolette and Will. Joe, confused, tries to stay calm. During dinner, Vernon shares his story. He says he was abused as a child, sold by his father and hunted down alongside other kids. Louise listens with tears in her eyes and opens up about her own trauma. Dawn explodes, interrupting her and yelling that it's enough. A few minutes later, Vernon thanks them and leaves. That night, Joe can't sleep. The next morning, he watches the news showing riots spreading across the country after George Floyd's death. Soon, protests erupt in Eddington too. The tension in town keeps building. Joe feels like the whole place is ready to blow up. The demonstrations grow larger. Young people chant for justice, recording everything on their phones. Joe watches from a distance, angry, convinced that it's all political manipulation. At the station, his deputies explain that the protesters are provoking the cops on purpose. But Joe can't understand why people have lost respect for authority. That afternoon, he and Michael head out to disperse one of the protests. Among the crowd are Sarah, Eric, and Brian. Sarah tries to talk to Michael, but he avoids her. Joe confronts the group and orders them to go home. Instead, they kneel in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in honor of George Floyd. Joe doesn't know how to react. He stands there, frozen, surrounded by cameras. Hours later, during a campaign meeting, Joe records a new speech. Standing before his supporters, he accuses Mayor Ted of being a predator. He claims that when Louise was 16, Ted got her pregnant and forced her to have an abortion. He calls him a rapist and says that's the real reason he's running, to clear his wife's name. The video is uploaded that night and goes viral. The next morning, Louise sees it and bursts into tears. Without saying a word, she records a message of her own, denying everything. She explains that she was indeed abused, but not by Ted, and that her mother invented that story years ago, which Joe repeated out of anger. She ends the video saying she feels no shame, only compassion for those who hurt her. Shortly after, she leaves town with Vernon. When Joe gets home, the house is empty. Dawn, however, feels proud. She believes Joe finally told the truth. Joe, devastated and silent, doesn't respond. On the news, the riots continue to escalate, and his campaign begins to crumble. That night, Mayor Ted throws a loud party at his house. The music blares, and neighbors call the police. Joe goes there himself, walks in, turns off the stereo, and demands some respect. But Ted humiliates him in front of everyone, slapping him twice and calling him a loser. Joe stands still, his eyes empty, and walks away without saying a word. On his way back, Joe walks into an empty bar. Sitting there is Lodge, the same homeless man who caused trouble months ago. He's drunk, muttering nonsense. Joe watches him for a few seconds, then slowly approaches. Without hesitation, he pulls the trigger. Lodge drops dead. Joe drags the body, stuffs it into a bag, and dumps it into a lake. For the first time, he crosses the line he swore he never would. Hours later, Mayor Ted is relaxing in his living room, watching TV. His son Eric comes home and drops Sarah's bag on the table. Suddenly, a bullet shatters the window. Ted falls dead instantly. Another shot hits Eric as he tries to run. The shooter is Joe. Calm and precise, he wipes the scene clean, collects the shell casings, and leaves fake messages to make it look like a political hit. The next morning, Joe gets the call. The mayor and his son have been murdered. He arrives at the scene with his deputies. The tribal police also show up, claiming the house is on shared land. Detective Jimenez takes charge of the investigation. He finds a rifle casing and tire tracks near the house. Joe pretends to cooperate, but subtly steers the investigation away from himself. Inside, he notices a handbag that belongs to Sarah. He calls her in for questioning, hinting she might have been involved with Eric and that the shooting could have been an act of revenge. Sarah denies everything, accusing the authorities of using the protests as an excuse for repression. Later that day, Joe gives a press conference. He promises justice and claims the attack was carried out by extremist groups. Some applaud his speech while others see it as pure political theater. That night, Joe eats dinner alone, watching the news. He convinces himself the town needs a strong leader, someone willing to do whatever it takes. The next day, Guy tells him that the video accusing Ted has become the most talked about topic in the entire state. Joe can't tell if he feels victorious or guilty. Michael, on the other hand, is on edge. He senses something's off about the case. Hours later, Brian arrives at the station to give a statement. He admits he was the one who sent Michael the photo of Eric kissing Sarah. Joe listens carefully and starts to piece together a plan. Soon after, he calls Michael in for questioning, asks for his phone, and scrolls through the messages. He finds the photo and accuses Michael of being jealous of Eric. Michael denies it. Joe keeps pressing and claims a weapon was found in his car. Michael explains it's just his practice rifle and that he has nothing to hide. Joe pretends to accept the answer, but quietly orders a full search of the vehicle. Detective Jimenez conducts it and finds a watch that belonged to Mayor Ted. Michael is immediately arrested. Desperate, he begs to make a phone call, insisting he's innocent. As he's locked in a cell, Jimenez notices something strange. The handwriting on Joe's office whiteboard matches the writing found on the mayor's wall. Alarmed, he rushes to review the evidence. Joe follows close behind, trying to stay calm. Jimenez heads toward Joe's house, but before he can enter, Dawn steps in his way. She blocks him, saying he has no right to be there. Watching through the security cameras, Joe realizes the truth is about to come out. Minutes later, an explosion rocks the area. A storage container behind the station bursts into flames. Joe runs toward it, but when he gets there, he discovers Michael has escaped from his cell. Guy says someone helped him from the outside. They split up to search. Joe moves through the woods and finds Michael standing next to a burning barrel. The air reeks of gasoline. Michael warns him not to come closer, that it's a trap. Joe hesitates, but Guy takes a step forward. In that instant, the place erupts. The explosion kills Guy instantly and throws Joe several feet away. Michael is left critically injured. Dazed and bleeding, Joe struggles to stand. In the distance, he spots a drone filming the scene and a hooded figure watching him from afar. He raises his gun and fires, but misses. The hooded figure runs off and Joe realizes his world is collapsing. He rushes home, desperate for shelter. Inside, he finds Dawn, hysterical, shouting that Vernon and Louise are the real killers and that now they're coming for them. Confused and consumed by guilt, Joe finally breaks. He admits that he was the one who killed the mayor. Just then, a gunshot rings out. The window shatters and the ceiling fills with dust. Someone is firing from outside. Joe drags Dawn to the car, and they speed away as bullets tear through the house. The town of Eddington has descended into chaos. On the road, Joe stops at a gun store. He grabs rifles, ammo, and bulletproof vests. When he steps outside again, his eyes are cold. He's a man with nothing left to lose. He opens fire blindly, unable to tell enemies from allies. In the chaos, he accidentally shoots Detective Jimenez. Moments later, one of the masked figures shoots Joe in the head. He collapses, still breathing. The gunman walks up to finish him, but before he can, a single shot echoes through the street. The attacker falls dead. Standing behind him is Brian, who had been recording everything on his phone. The masked man lies lifeless, and Brian, terrified, has just become an accidental hero. The police arrive and find Joe barely alive, his body shattered and his mind broken. A year has passed since that night of chaos in Eddington. The town is no longer the same. What began as a fight for freedom has turned into a community fractured by fear and violence. Former Mayor Ted is dead. His son is gone. But the new mayor is Joe. Though his body was left completely paralyzed after the shooting, he won the election from his hospital bed. Today, he governs from a wheelchair, unable to speak, unable to move anything but his eyes. At his side is Dawn, his mother-in-law turned spokesperson. She appears in public on his behalf, smiling for the cameras and delivering speeches in his name. She presents him as a martyr, the man who saved Eddington from its enemies within. At home, however, Joe lives trapped in his own prison. Dawn and a male caretaker feed him and move his unresponsive body. Every day, Dawn talks to him as if he were still the strong leader he once was. But when the cameras turn off, she treats him like a helpless child. One night, she shows him a video. Louise, visibly pregnant, standing beside Vernon, talking about freedom and awakening from the system's lies. Joe watches helplessly, his eyes burning with rage. His breathing quickens, but his body won't move. Later that night, in the darkness of the room, Dawn crawls into his bed. The caretaker joins her, laughing softly, and Joe lies there, motionless, trapped inside his own body, forced to watch, powerless to scream.